consultation review, special in the fact that for Rotorua Lakes Council, this is the first time that we have been trialling a online feedback in a Zoom world, and I think just totally reflective of the environment that we are in currently. So I hope you're all safe in your various bubbles and looking after yourselves and your whānau. My name is Una Hopkins and I'm the District Leadership and Democracy DCE for the Rotorua Lakes Council. And today I will be taking you through a bit of a presentation on all of the ins and outs of the rep review, and also leading you through a bit of a Q&A session. So in terms of our agenda today, first off, we're going to spend a little bit of time just going through some what we call Zoom etiquette. These are just a few little things to help the session run and flow really nice and smoothly, and so that everybody can hear and everybody gets opportunities for asking questions and getting those responses back in. So once we've been through the Zoom etiquette, I'm going to share my screen, and that's going to bring up a presentation in which we'll go through some of the representation review requirements. So there's quite a few things that councils have to think about when they're putting a proposal together, and we'll spend a little bit of time going through each of those. Then we'll actually spend some time going through where the council have landed in terms of their draft proposal, which they now have out for consultation, which is what we're talking about today, and which we all hope that you'll provide us with some really great feedback on. And lastly, we'll take that through into a Q&A session. So just moving on into actual Zoom etiquette, what we're doing is we are asking that during the presentation style that you just keep any questions that you have, and we'll use the full time of the Q&A session for that. So while I'm presenting and everybody is being awesome already and has themselves on mute, that's fantastic. That way we just cut out all of that background noise that might be going on in our various bubbles, and who knows what else is going on at home at the moment. If when we get to the question and the Q&A session, you do have a question, on your screen somewhere in Zoom world, there should be a little tab that's called reactions. And by clicking on that, it brings up a series of little icons, and one of them is a raise hand icon. And if you click on that, like I've just done here, you'll see a wee hand pop up. And so we're going to use that for questions and answers. If you can't find the reactions or are having trouble with that, don't worry. Just put your hand up and wave at me. There's not too many of us on the Zoom environment, so I should be able to see you waving furiously at me. So that's fantastic. And you'll see that I've just lowered my hand there. We've already talked about our microphones, so just turning them on and off while we're in question and answer session. And just so that you are aware, we are recording this session today. It's not being live streamed, but we are recording it and will be publishing it to the council's YouTube channel and website following this. If you've got a little bit of a concern with yourself being recorded and published during that question and answer session, please just send me a little chat. So somewhere again on your Zoom screen, there is a little tab with like a speech bubble, and underneath that it says chat. If you click on that and select my name, and you can send me a little message, what we can do is we can remove your part of the question and answer session from the recording before it's published. However, in saying that, I just would like to say that your questions today are very valuable to this whole process. And the question that you are thinking and hopefully ask is probably similar or the same to someone else in the community. So I hope you do feel comfortable in putting forward lots of questions today for us. So I think that brings me to the end of our Zoom etiquette part of the session. And if you bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen. Sometimes it takes a few moments to bring that up, but we'll do that now and we'll get on into the presentation. Right, presentation time. So the Representation Review 2022, we are calling this Your Choice 2022. And, oh, it's gone too far. We've already been through the agenda, so I won't go back over that. We'll get straight into having a look at the Representation Review requirements. So first off, some people may be asking, what is a representation review? And it's a piece of work that council has to do at least once every 6 years. And now is Rotorua Lakes Council's time to be doing that. In a representation review, it's an opportunity for the council to take a fresh look at the structure of its membership and the way those people that are elected, the way they are elected. So this is looking at who is going to sit around the council table and where do they come from and how will they be elected to be there. And it's also ultimately about ensuring that there is fair and effective representation for every person in the Rotorua district. A representation review is a big thing, and there's actually a 3-step process to it all. 2 of the steps we have already been through, and we won't go over them in a lot of detail today because we want to get onto the things that are important within the representation review proper itself. But 2 major decisions are already made in advance of having a look at those representation review requirements. The first is the electoral system. So how are we going to vote? The council has made the decision back in 2017 to continue with first past the post. And that means that first past the post is set for the 2019 elections and the 2022 elections. First past the post ultimately means the councillor with the highest polling or highest counted votes will get a seat around the table. The second part of the process has been the establishment of the Māori ward, and this was done in May 2021 this year. That came about by changes to from central government and the introduction of the Local Electoral Māori Wards and Māori Constituencies Amendment Act of 2021. What this provided for was some additional time for councils to consider the introduction of a Māori ward, and on the 21st of May, Rotorua Lakes Council made that decision. The question around the establishment of a Māori ward is therefore not part of the representation review. It kind of sets some of the considerations and the way forward in putting the proposal together. The last part of the process is where we are today, the representation review proper. And this ultimately will go through till April next year when we have a final decision on representation and we can start letting people know what that membership and structure is going to look like in the lead into the next election, local election. So what does the representation review look at? There are a number of considerations within the overall review, and we have a look at things like how many councillors should we have sitting around the table, and what kind of framework should we have? So framework means, do we have a ward system, or do we have at large like we have now, or should we consider a mixed model, wards and at large potentially? If we do introduce multiple wards, we have to look at the boundaries. So where do these wards exist? What's their geographical areas of those boundaries that represent a ward. Also, if you do go down a pure wards path, you have to have a look at councillors within that ward. How many should there be per ward? And lastly, we also have a look at community boards. Do we introduce new community boards, retain the community boards that we have, or even look to disestablish community boards? So the first consideration is around the number of councillors. And we need to ask ourselves that question about how many councillors are required to lead the Rotorua district and represent the needs of the people of Rotorua. There is a guideline for the total number of councillors, and we can have a minimum of 5 councillors, and we can have up to a maximum of 29 councillors. That number, the 5 to 29, excludes the mayor. The position of the mayor is voted from every individual who is eligible to vote, so at large within the district. When we're having a look at what is the good number of councillors to sit around the table, we need to consider things like the district's diversity. Are we representing the people within our district? We need to ensure that the voters can easily engage with our councillors. Can we meet with them? Can we interact with them? Can we go to them and they're accessible? We're also having a look at the workload of councillors and being able to balance that across a group of people so that they are being effective in their roles as leaders. We're also trying to bring a range of skills and knowledge to the table. And very important, we want to see that through that number of councillors, are they representing the community's needs and interests and pulling that information from across the entire district and bringing that to the council decision-making table? Another requirement that we have to take a look at is the framework. And so this is that conversation around wards or at large or a mixed model arrangement. Wards are created if it provides a more effective and fairer way for residents to obtain access to elected members to have their views heard. Wards are generally geographical. They may wrap around a suburb or a neighbourhood, and they are established to give communities of interest the ability to be represented around the table. The question that we have to ask ourselves is whether there are distinct communities of interest that will lack an opportunity for representation if wards didn't exist. So looking at communities of interest for fair and effective representation, and how do we do that? So a community of interest is considered a group of people who have a common geographical or economic, social, historical, or other bond. They're where people feel they belong, where they live, work, shop, go to school, and play. And the really interesting thing about the representation review and the requirements that are set to us is actually a definition for communities of interest isn't defined in the legislation. So it actually comes down to the district themselves using what I've just described up there as a guide to assess whether there are distinctive communities of interest, and for the district themselves to make that definition between what is potentially one community of interest and how are they different from another one. And what we do know from the Rotorua people is that our residents, our people, often move between communities while they live, work, and play. So that's something to consider when we're having a look at our wards, a way of representing fairly across our district. So there's some couple of words that are real key to the representation review, and when you're looking at groups of people or communities of interest. And the first one is around fair representation. Fair representation has to be considered, especially when we're looking at wards, and making sure that each elected ward councillor represents a similar number of people. Okay, and that similar number of people has to be within 10%. There's also another thing that we have to have a look at, and that's effective representation. And that's around the accessibility for elected members and how the councillors can get feedback from our communities. How do we engage with one another? How can we get our interests and our needs through to our elected members? How can they receive information from us to take to the decision-making table and represent us in an effective manner? And that's the consideration for there. The final consideration is around community boards and asking the question around, are they or would they be an appropriate way to provide fair and effective representation for individuals and communities in its district? The required decisions around community boards are whether there is a need for a community board or boards within the district. And if the council decides that one or more community boards should be established or retained, we have to consider the nature of that community and then also have a look at the structure of that community board. Those are the requirements and the considerations that have to be thought out, fleshed out, discussed before a proposal is put together. And that's where we're up to now. Excuse me, I just want to take a sip of water. So the proposal, what does that look like? Council adopted a draft preferred proposal on the 31st of August of this year. That proposal, which has now been published and is out for community feedback, is what we're talking about today, is based around one mayor elected at large, like we've already talked about, one Māori ward, which we've already talked about, but defining within that there would be 2 seats within that Māori ward. A general ward that would have 4 seats and 4 at-large seats. A Rotorua Lakes Community Board and a Rural Community Board. So let's take each one of those elements a little bit more in detail. The number of councillors. So the proposal is to have 10 councillors in total, and remember there will also be the mayor. So there would effectively be 11 elected members representing Rotorua district. We currently have 10 councillors, and the proposal is to stay with that number. 10 councillors has been what we've been hearing from the community in some of the early feedback that we've had when we've worked with elected members and community groups around the appropriateness, the effectiveness of the current 10 as a number of councillors representing Rotorua district. We believe that 10 councillors has served the community well to this point in time, and 10 councillors has been the number of total councillors for the 2016 and 2019 elections. When we come to have a look at the Māori wards, remember we've already talked about this has been established, and the actual question around establishment of Māori wards, it's not possible to revisit this decision in this part of the representation review. This part of the representation review has a look at the structure and the form of that Māori ward. By essence and by the decision alone, the introduction of a Māori ward does establish a wards-based model, and it does create a disproportion between Māori electoral voters and general electoral voters. So we have to consider that when we're then looking at seats and what framework you're going to have for the whole model. There's been many discussions around one Māori ward or even multiple Māori wards. And at this point in time, it's been agreed that if we were to look at the district and look to break up effectively the district into multiple Māori wards. There is a lot more work and consultation with iwi that is required to make such a thing work. And that's taking into consideration those geographical divisions or communities of interest. So what we've been looking at this point is that the Māori ward will be a district-wide Māori ward being proposed. So that leads into the overall framework and the conversation around ward system, at-large system, or a mixed model arrangement. And remember, before I just said the introduction of a Māori ward initially forces you directly into a wards-based system. The proposal that is in front of everybody at the moment is for a mixed model. So by introducing the Māori ward, we have in our proposal put forward that we will have an at-large component, which means that a number of councillors set aside in an at-large component. Every person in Rotorua could vote for those people, regardless of what electoral role that you're on. Because unfortunately, the establishment of the Māori wards means that whatever electoral role you're on, that is the way that you will have to vote. So as I just said, at large, everyone, regardless of what electoral role you are on, will have the opportunity to vote for those candidates. Why have we put forward a mixed model? And that has been based on early engagement that we have. People have said that they want the opportunity to vote for the maximum number they possibly can, and that is seen to be fair. And it is also seen that that is the best way to represent the needs and interests. So then we have a look at Māori seats within the ward. And the proposal is to establish 2 Māori ward councillors. Te Tātou's consultation was undertaken when they were recommending the establishment of Māori wards, did not comment on how many elected members should come from the Māori ward, and did not make comment on the rest of council would be constituted. That's what this part of the representation review looks at. So within that, we can have a look at that structure and form within the Māori ward. The proposal then is for 2 Māori ward councillors, and this decision and part of the proposal is directly related to the framework, that being having that mixed model opportunity and that ability for everyone to have as near an equal opportunity to vote for the same number of councillors. Cast your mind to how the structure is now. There are 10 councillors, and everyone, regardless of the electoral role they're on, had the opportunity to cast 10 votes and ensure that the people that sit around the table and make decisions for them match their needs and values. That is what this proposal is trying to achieve also, but with the added complexity of having a ward structure in place set by that establishment of the Māori ward. The number of Māori seats is just not plucked from thin air. There is actually quite a complicated process for working out how many seats you could have within your model. The first part of that is establishing the total number of councillors that you have. And in this proposal, and I'm purely using the numbers for our proposal so that you can see how the 2 seats is obtained. Establishment of the total number of councillors is 10. Then when we've had the conversation around what framework do we have, that wards versus at large or a mixed, we've established a mixed system. Then in the calculation, you consider how many councillors you wish to see representing the district at large. For this proposal, the suggestion is 4. So you take that 4 out of any equation when you're going forward. So what that leaves you with is a total of 6 effectively general seats, of which a element of those is dedicated to being those Māori seats. So those 6 seats multiplied by a factor, which is 0.28, gives us that 2 seats. That ratio of Māori electoral population to the total Māori and general electoral population is provided to us by Stats NZ, and they provide that for every council in New Zealand. That ratio will be different for every district, but they work that out based on latest statistics that have come from the latest census data. So we can't change that ratio. And for Rotorua, it is 0.28. But just remember that 0.28 or 28% does not represent the entire Māori population in Rotorua. We have nearly 40% of our district consider themselves to be Māori, yet in this calculation, only 28% of that is reflective. So another consideration there is when you're having a look at a mixed model, you are also providing for everybody who has decided to retain themselves on the general electoral roll. So the question then would be, well, how does voting look, therefore, out of a possible of 10 votes? So if you are registered on the Māori electoral roll, if this goes forward and is adopted, in the next elections, you would have 2 votes for councillors within the Māori ward, and you would have 4 votes for candidates standing at large. So you will get a total of 6 votes. Don't forget, you'll also get your 1 vote for mayor on top of that. If you are on the general electoral roll, you will get 4 votes for those that are running in the general ward, and you will get the 4 votes for the at large. So that's a total of 8 votes. And just in consideration there, in the 2019 elections, all councillors were voted from at large, and so everyone, regardless of the electoral roll that you're on, had a total of 10 votes. Lastly, community boards. So the proposal has been to retain both the Lakes Community Board and the Rural Community Board. Why community boards? This provides representation that would not otherwise be able to be represented by way of a ward, and that is generally as a result of small population sizes compared to the population of the urban area. Rotorua as a district, nearly 80% of the district is classed as being in the urban environment. And so a community board can set up to ensure that the distinct interests and needs of these smaller populated areas are voiced within council. Community boards, both the Lakes Community Board and the Rural Community Board, have proven very successful for Rotorua since the introduction of them. The community boards have membership at both of the current council committees, being the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee and the Operations and Monitoring Committee. The community boards are also actively involved alongside Te Tātou Aotearoa and council in the development of all strategic direction setting for the district. The community boards do have a dedicated budget within the long-term plan, and they administer this on behalf of the community to ensure that capital projects within their areas assist in the overall community well-being of the lakes and rural areas. We're also not proposing any differences to the structure of those community boards. So each community board will consist of a chair, 3 elected members and 1 nominated councillor. a slight interest this time going forward is that one nominated councillor will only be able to come from either the Māori ward area, which is across the district, or the general ward. So councillors who will be standing for the at-large will not then be able to be nominated as a councillor to either the Lakes Community Board or the Rural Community Board. So where are we at in terms of the timetable? We are in phase 2, which is consultation. So feedback and an opportunity for you and for everybody in our community to get a better understanding of the proposal that's being put forward and to provide feedback back to council for them to consider in going forward and finalising a final structure. Feedback closes on the 8th of October, and I've got a little bit of a change that needs to be made to this timetable in that the hearings are set for the 19th of October. And this provides for a lot more opportunity for current elected members to consider the feedback and consider everything that they hear in those hearings sessions, and to be able to put that then forward into a final model which they need to adopt by the 16th of November. At that point in time, we then go into phase 3 of the overall representation review. And that's an area around objecting and appealing to the final decision. So if you put a submission in and then you felt that council still have not listened, or there are things that you feel that are still not correct or representative or fair within that final proposal, you can put in an objection and appeal that. There is a time period in which to do that, and that is from the 19th of November through to the 19th of December. If we receive appeals and objections, all of the submissions and all of the proposal work then gets sent off to the local government commission, and they will then run a process where they will take in all of the information and they will make a final determination on what the structure will look like and will be in place for the next local elections. So that is where we bring ourselves to the question and answer session. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can then track hands being raised and everything. So just bear with me for a moment while I stop the share. Wonderful. So I'm just going to take a sip of water and then we can get into some question and answers. So while I'm having a sip of water, have a think about those questions that you want to raise. Right, and so just to remind you all again, if you do have a question, please use the reactions button, click on that and your little hand will come up and signal and then I can call upon you and we can go from there from questions. So I am open to you all now for questions. So I've got a question from Hilary Walker. So Hilary, hello, how are you?
Right. Yeah, no, hi, I'm good, thank you. Thank you, that was a really, interesting and useful presentation, so I appreciate that. There are, so just out of that, there's a couple of questions that I've got. One, so from what I can see from the proposal, and particularly with the ward system that's been put up, is that to me, that doesn't actually look like there's really any material difference from the large system. So with the exception of the Māori ward, I appreciate that, that point and the point that introduces a mixed system. But when you use a ward that's just got one boundary, one district-wide boundary with not multiple boundaries, did council not consider there to be actual communities of interest that could have benefited by multiple ward boundaries? I guess, well, sorry, there's probably a few questions in there, but
there's a few, yes, yeah.
But so, okay, so first of all, with that ward that's just one boundary, that to me looks exactly like an at-large election.
Yes, you are kind of right, actually. What the introduction of a Māori ward does is it sets you directly into a ward system. And so if we'd have done nothing else, it would have meant that you have a Māori ward and you have everybody else. What that means is, though, if you are on the Māori electoral roll, you will only be able to vote for those that are in the Māori ward. And at best, based on a maximum of 10 councillors, which is kind of one of the principles that we've set with, you would only get a maximum of 3 councillors that you could vote for. And so everybody else would be excluded from your ability to vote for those candidates. The flip side of that means that everybody else who is on the general electoral roll, and regardless of where you live and all that type of stuff, you will get 7 votes. The council does not think that this is a fair system, especially when we have many people, many people who are Māori and who are not on the Māori electoral roll. And so it creates a disproportion between those that are on the Māori roll and those that are on the general roll. It also takes away that ability which we've had in the past, where you've been able to vote for 10 people and you've been able to, as a voter, assess those candidates and ensure that your vote goes to those people you believe that are representing your needs and interests. So by then creating an at-large component, what we're doing is we are closing up that disproportion between those on the Māori electoral roll and everybody else. And because we've had a system where we have been at large for multiple years, and that question around people in Rotorua move across the district a lot to live, work, play, all that sort of stuff. The definition of then getting down into communities of interest is really difficult to do. So hence we've got this, which looks to be, we call it a general ward, but it is actually across the district.
Yeah.
And then you have an at-large, which means it's actually everybody, it's across the district, and it's also then across the Māori ward. I hope that answers that one.
Maybe, but I might just need to sort of, I guess I guess I can't understand why, but I'll look into this myself, so we won't waste other people's time on it. But I guess I can't understand why either the ward system couldn't be separated into some communities of interest, and or just the 4 that are allocated to the at-ward just would go into the at-large. I guess that's the bit I can't understand, why there isn't just 8 at-large.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's actually the fact.
Yeah. Yes. With the rules that we've got in the Local Electoral Act, we can't put all of those in the at-large, because your establishment of a Māori ward creates that ward system, and so it then sets the train for the next step. So it's trying to work with the current legislation to ensure that effectively anybody in Rotorua can still have the maximum, I suppose, voting opportunities, and trying to get that equality that I can have 10 votes, the person next to me can have 10 votes. We don't have that situation at the moment, so how can we still try to get as close as possible to that with the system that we've got in train? Okay,
so then just one other question, because I was really interested to hear you say that 80% of the district is classified as being an urban environment.
Yep.
What's used to classify, how is that, what are the variables used to identify that? That intrigues me.
So based on the GIS, and it is something that can be, is looked at and reviewed. So based on where people live, there is what we call an urban fence, and it is a boundary that is around the district that distinguishes between in an urban boundary and in a rural boundary. As our population grows, we will need to look at and review that going forward. But based on the information that we have at hand, that urban sort of fence line hasn't changed.
But so it's just a population base. It's not, that's the only variable.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
No worries, thank you. We've next got Michelle Nahu. Hi, Michelle. Just need you to take your microphone off so we can hear you.
Okay. Is the mic on? Sorry.
Yes, it is. No, we can hear you now.
Hey, great. Hey, look, Una, thank you. I've jumped on board just to have a look at all of this and to have a bit of thought. I don't know whether I feel as if there's a fair representation, according to the wards or how the councillors are formed. I'm going to probably leave the hui, join every other one, and make a final decision about my thoughts and what I really think. I'm representing grey power.
Oh, yes, yep.
And so I've got a committee that I will go back to, and we've been looking at it prior to this, but it was good to be on. Hey, thank you for your time today. It's given me a bigger understanding on the the way it works. But I think for me I suppose as a resident, as a Māori, as somebody that's on the Māori role, which I find, limits you to, your voting rights. So if there's a better way for us to, have a better say, then I'm all keen. But thank you for everybody. Ngā mihi.
Mihi. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. So next we've got Michelle Phillips.
Kia ora tātou, Michelle Phillips representing Ngāti Tauru Ngāti Whāua Rūnanga Trust. I've got a couple of questions. I live rurally, just for a start, so this is a little bit aside to my role. Has the council ever done the numbers or raised an opportunity to discuss communities of interest? And I'm talking rural. Now, I know that we won't meet the 10% threshold, but there is definitely a clear community of interest.
Yes. So
has the case been put to the Local Government Commission before?
So we have a rural community board, and that's
yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, well, that's how
the issue I have with the rural community board is that they do not have a vote at the decision-making table. Hence why I'm asking if the homework has been done to establish a rural ward.
Yeah, so the homework has been done to establish a rural ward, and what you just said there before is that there is not a large enough population to establish a Māori ward. However,
the rural ward,
sorry. However, if you were to increase the number of councillors around the table, there is potential then to have a rural ward or a non-urban ward. So that has been looked at, but at this point in time, with the principle of 10 councillors, the then population doesn't allow for the establishment of a rural or / non-urban ward.
No, that's not quite correct, because what it does say is that you can put a case forward to the Local Government Commission. Now, I'm quite aware of that because I've done this homework with Taupo District Council very recently. Yep. Are the numbers available for how many people live within the rural areas or the lakes areas online?
They are, yes. And the Rural Community Board is running a workshop, I think it's on the 27th of September, and they are going through a number of scenarios to look at the numbers and look at options around a consideration for a non-urban ward or a rural ward and what the numbers look like in that. A couple of those options are definitely non-conforming, and an option could work if you increase the number of councillors. So they're going to be workshopping all of that towards the end of the month. And from that workshop, the rural community is putting forward their a submission based on those options and proposals to be considered.
Okay, thank you. The last question is the 10 councillor number locked and loaded, or is that able to be discussed via submission?
It's able to be discussed by the submission. So what we've got at the moment on the table is a draft proposal, and this is what this process is. So it is saying that at this point in time, this is the preferred option that council are putting forward, and they're open to all suggestions from the community and through this process for them to consider what a final structure will look like.
Okay, just one more thing, sorry, and then I'll...
No worries.
So am I right in understanding that if there is a drive to a different structure regarding wards, the Māori ward numbers could change from 2, they could potentially increase? If we change from the 4 general wards and 4 at large?
Yeah, every time you start to tinker with what happens in your splitting up of your district into more wards, that will change the number of seats within the Māori ward. So each time you sort of tinker with one element of the structure, you have to go back and sort of put everything else through the whole sort of churn effectively. Yeah.
Ngā mihi, much appreciated.
Cool, thank you. Justin Adams, your hand up next. Hi, Justin.
Hello. My question was just about that ratio calculation. Where is that found?
So if you go to the local government commission website, within that there is a list of every local authority with that calculation laid out for everyone. So they publish that. They also send us that statistic at the beginning of this process for us to use.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right, have we got any more questions? I'll just pause for a little moment, see if anybody's got a burning question that comes to mind. It appears that we don't have any more questions. Cool. I'm getting a couple of chat messages in, which is great. Cool. Thank you. So, look, really, really pleased to see so many of you here in Zoom world today. I hope that you have got a little bit of further understanding of the proposal that council is putting forward, and we look forward to receiving your submission. We do have a number of these Zoom huis that we are running, and hopefully if we do get down to a level 1 at some stage, we may be able to do a pop-up on some face-to-face as well. So as I said before, this is a very different environment for council to be running a consultation phase in. Thank you very much for your time, your valuable time today, and coming online and listening through and walking through the proposal, and for your questions. So if there aren't any further questions, I shall leave you to go and enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you, everybody. Ka kite.